Hello, my name is Brian Kinney, and I'm a Striven ERP advisor. Welcome to our Human Resources lesson, where we will be discussing user roles and permissions. Today's topics will include user role management, configuring user roles, manage user access, requesting access, and user role assignment. And with that, let's get started. To begin our lesson today, let's first view our list of user roles in our Striven system. To do that, click the Employees tab, followed by Roles underneath the Security section. This will bring you to the User Role Management list. Here you will find all the active user roles that you have in your Striven system. If you would like, you can search for a user role by name or by inactive or active user roles as well. If you would like to manage any of the existing user roles, you can click on the name of the user role, which is a blue hyperlink. This will bring you into the user role itself, where you will see the user role name, whether it is default or not, the base description that has been added, and in the access section, you'll be able to see what permissions have been included for this user role. On the top right, you will be able to see all the employees who have access to this role, and whether they can assign permissions or not. If we click Save and Close, we'll be brought back into the user role management page. And if we want to add a brand new user role, we can simply click the blue Add button at the top left of the user roles list. Here, we'll be able to enter the new name for our user role that we're adding. Next, we can choose whether this is the default user role for our company or not. If we make this the default, every time we add a new employee, this user role will be associated automatically. We can also add a brief description for the user role as well. Once you have your description all set, you can go down to the Access section. Here you'll see a list of parent groupings, which can be expanded to list individual permissions and subgroups as well. Most individual permissions will be highlighted in blue, meaning it's a hyperlink. And by clicking on the permission itself, you can view a description of that permission to see exactly what it grants access to. To include a permission inside of the user role, simply click on the white box, which when clicked will turn blue. Blue indicates that the user role has access to that function permission. If it's white, that means it does not have access to that permission. You will see three colors throughout managing your user role. Blue and white are two of the colors, and gray is the other color. Gray is strictly used for parent groupings or subgroups, and this indicates that the group has at least one permission, but not all permissions inside of the grouping. You can also search for functions by name. For instance, here, if I want to search for user role management, I can type user and click the magnifying glass to the right. This will narrow down my list, and here we can see user role management and user roles add edit. And to grant access to all these function permissions, I can either choose one, which you'll see the parent grouping turn blue, or you can choose all as well. Please note that when you choose the blue top parent grouping, you're only allowing access to the permissions underneath, not all of the permissions underneath the main grouping. We can see this by clicking the X button on the right of the magnifying glass. And we'll see that not all of collaboration has been enabled, but only those three permissions that we saw when we searched user. We can also choose Select All, which will select all the permissions inside of the user role, or Clear All to restart. If we want users who have this role to be allowed to assign permissions, we can check the box at the top right and choose what user roles can be assigned. By choosing a user role from the drop-down, any employee who has the user role we are creating will be allowed to assign other users the user role we've selected, in this case, project management. Once you've allowed certain permissions, you can click the Save button to save the user role. Once the user role is saved, you'll be able to add employees directly to this role, and this is one method of assigning employees to a user role. By choosing an employee, that employee will have access to all the permissions that have been included in the user role itself. By choosing Save and Close, we can go back to the user role management page. And in the user role management page, we'll have the name of the role in one column, how many users are assigned to that role in a second column, as well as a status label that lets us know which user role is our default user role. The number of users is also a hyperlink. By clicking on the number of the users, this will bring us into the user role info where we can see all the employees who have access to that user role. Another method in managing permissions is to use the Manage User Access list. To get there, click Employees and choose Permissions underneath the Security section. Here we'll be brought to the Manage User Access, and you'll notice that this view looks much like what we had inside of the user role itself. Here we can choose the parent grouping and see all the individual permissions underneath. But here, instead of having boxes for each individual permission to include on a user role, this will help us manage and view access to a specific permission on the list. Just like we had in the user role, we can search for a particular function up here. So if I want to search for user and click search, we'll have the same exact options that we had at the user role as well. To manage access for a particular permission, click the Manage Access hyperlink. This will initiate a pop-up where you can see all the users who have access to this permission, as well as any individual employees who you want to grant access to. If you want to grant an employee access to this specific permission, you can click the field, type in the employee's name, and choose them from the drop-down. You'll see the employee's name added underneath, and there will also be a View Effective Access hyperlink. By choosing that hyperlink, you can see all the permissions that the employee has access to, and you can even search for specific permissions in here as well. If you want to grant a user role access to this specific permission, you can select the field and choose the user role underneath. And any employee who has access to the HR user role will now have access to the BuzzPost's Override User Preferences and Notify All permission. By choosing Save and Close, you can save your changes, and you will be brought back to the Manage User Access list. If you choose Close, your changes will not take effect. The other hyperlink you have available at the Manage User Access page is View Access. If I click that hyperlink, a pop-up will appear in which I will see all the employees who have access to this permission and a list of their user roles. I'll also have the View Effective Access link, just like I had before, where I can see all the permissions they have access to, and I can also search for a particular employee within this list as well. If I search for an employee who is not on this list and click the magnifying glass, no records will be displayed because that employee does not have access to the permission. However, if I do search for an employee who has access, they will be listed down below. I can also click the X to reset my search to see all employees who have access to this particular permission. Next, let's take a look at how you can manage user roles for a particular employee inside of your system. And we can do that by going to the Employees list. So we'll click Employees tab and then List from the drop-down. Here we can click Search to show all of our employees. And to assign a user role to an existing employee, simply click the employee's name to go into their employee info page. Here you'll see a user access section where you will see all the user roles that they have access to. And to assign a new user role, click the Choose field and select what user role you would like to grant access to. By choosing a user role from the drop-down, you'll see the user role added to their list of available user roles, and by clicking Save, that employee will now have access to all the permissions inside of the configured user role. This can also be done when adding a new employee into your system as well. If you go back to the Employees list, we can click the Add Employee button. And here in the User Access section, our default user role will appear, but we can also add a new user role as well if we want. Once we add a secondary user role, we can then remove the default user role if we so choose. Once we enter their full name, email, and configure all their information to fit our needs, we can click Save and Close, and they'll receive a welcome email. And upon logging into Striven, they will have all the available permissions that have been included inside of their user role. If an employee lands on a page in which they would like access to a specific function permission, they can request access by clicking the gear icon at the top right of any page inside of Striven and choosing Settings from the drop-down. Here they will find a list of permissions that affect the particular page they're viewing inside of Striven, and all the functions found within. On the far right, there will be a status located for each individual permission. There are two types of labels found here. One is what you have in front of us here that says you have access. This means the employee has access to the permission located on this list. The other option is request access, and it will be an orange button, which when they click, they can request access to the function permission. And whoever receives those notifications can review, approve, or deny the request. If you want to grant a user role access to request permissions, we can go to Employees, Roles, choose a user role, and in the search function permission, type Request. By clicking the magnifying glass, we will see a permission underneath the core grouping that says Can Request Access. By choosing to include that permission, users will be able to choose the gear icon, click Settings, and request access as we just reviewed. If you would not like them to be able to request access, you can simply remove that permission from the available user role. Once you're ready, click Save and Close, and employees with that user role will be able to either request access or not request access to function permissions inside of Striven. So that was a look at user role and permission management inside of Striven, and how you can best manage individual permissions and user roles for the employees and users who access Striven for your company.